Volume 3, Chapter 15 of The Widow Barnaby by Frances Milton Trollope. This recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. Agnes grows miserable. An explanatory conversation with Colonel Hubert leaves her more in the dark than ever. A letter arrives from Frederick Stephenson. At this period of their history the star of Agnes appeared much less propitious than that of her aunt Barnaby. Not all her inclination to construe every look and word of Colonel Hubert into something wiser and better, more noble and more kind than the looks and words of any other mortal man, could long prevent her from feeling that he was profoundly unhappy, and that, despite some occasional flashes of an emotion which her own heart taught her to know proceeded from love, he evidently avoided being with her, as much as it was possible for him to do, without attracting the attention of others. Her aunt and his aunt went steadily on arranging between themselves a variety of preliminaries to the happy union they contemplated, while no hint that such a union was possible ever passed the lips of the intended bridegroom during any moment that circumstances placed him near his promised bride. More than once she saw him change colour when he approached her, and sometimes, but not often, she had caught his melancholy eyes fixed earnestly upon her, and it was at such moments that she felt persuaded he still loved her. But wherefore he, who had boldly wooed her when so many things conspired to make his doing it objectionable, should seem to shun her now that everything was so smooth and easy for him, she vainly laboured to understand. " For time nor place," she exclaimed with something like bitterness, " did then adhere, and yet he would make both. They have made themselves, and that their fitness now doth unmake him." By melancholy degrees, everything that had most contributed to her happiness became her torment. The conversation of Miss Peters was inexpressibly irksome to her, particularly when they found themselves in confidential tete a tete, for then she could not help suspecting that her friend was longing to ask her some questions respecting the singularity of her lover's manner; the flattering notice of the well-pleased Lady Elizabeth, the sisterly affection manifested by the amiable Lady Stephenson, and, more than all the rest, the happy, bustling, business-like manner of her aunt Compton, who never for a moment seemed to forget that they were all preparing for a wedding. So complete was this preoccupation, that it was many days before the old lady perceived that her Agnes, in the midst of all this joyful preparation, looked neither well nor happy ; nay, even when at last the sad eye and pale cheek of her darling attracted her attention, she persuaded herself for many days more that love making was too sentimental a process to permit those engaged in it to be gay. She knew that the sighing of lovers was proverbial, and though she did not remember to have read anything upon the subject exactly resembling what she remarked in Agnes, and to say truth, in Colonel Hubert also, she did not, for she could not, doubt that everything was going on just as it should do, though her own want of practical experience rendered her incapable of fully understanding it. But if Agnes was wretched, Colonel Hubert was infinitely more so; for all the misery that she darkly feared, without knowing either its nature or for how long it was likely to continue, came to him with the tremendous certainty of a misfortune that had already fallen upon him, and from which escape seemed less possible from day to day. She knew not what to think of him, and great, no doubt, was the unhappiness produced by such uncertainty, but greater still was the suffering produced by looking in her innocent face, and knowing, as well as Colonel Hubert did, why it grew daily paler. Not seldom, indeed, was he tortured by the apprehension that the line of conduct he had pursued in recalling Frederick Stephenson, was by no means so unquestionably right in its self-sacrificing severity as he had intended it should be. Had he not endangered the tranquillity of Agnes, while guarding with jealous care his own proud sense of honour? If an unhappy concurrence of circumstances had involved him in difficulties that rendered his conduct liable to suspicion, ought he not to have endured the worst degree of contempt that this could bring upon him, rather than have suffered her peace to be the sacrifice? Night and day these doubts tormented him. For hours he wandered through the roads on the opposite side of the river, where, comparatively speaking, he was sure no Clifton idlers could encounter him, and reviewing his own conduct in 1,000 ways, found none that would make him satisfied with himself. At length, in the mere restlessness of misery, he determined to tell Agnes all. She shall know his love, his generous, uncalculating love, while I stood by, and reasoned on the inconvenience her aunt Barnaby's vulgarity might bring. She shall know all, though it will make her hate me. Such was the resolution with which he crossed the ferry after wandering a whole morning in Leigh Wood, and climbing the step path too rapidly to give himself leisure to meditate temperately on the measure he had determined to pursue, He hurried forward to the dwelling of Miss Compton, and was already in her drawing room before he had at all decided in what manner he should contrive to get Agnes alone. In this, however, fortune favoured him ; for Miss Compton, having some point on which she desired to communicate with Lady Elizabeth, had ordered the carriage, and invited Agnes to pay a visit to Lady Stephenson ; but the poor girl had no heart to sustain a conversation with a friend from whom she most earnestly desired to conceal all her thoughts, so she declined the invitation, alleging her wish to write a letter to Empton. As much alone, and, if possible, more melancholy still, than when, a few short weeks before, he made his memorable visit in Half Moon Street, Colonel Hubert found Agnes listlessly lying upon a sofa, her eyes closed, but their lashes too recently wetted by tears to make him fancy her asleep. She was in an inner room, to which he entered through the open door that led from the larger drawing room, and he was close beside her before she was aware of his approach. It was with a dreadful pang that he contemplated the change anxiety had wrought on her delicate features since the evening she first appeared to him in all the bright light hearted joy of her new happiness under the protection of her aunt. Love, honour, gratitude, tenderness, and remorse, all rushed to his bosom, and so completely overpowered the philosophy by which he had hitherto restrained his feelings, that he dropped on his knees beside her, and seizing the hand that languidly hung by her side, covered it with passionate kisses. An iron chain is not a stronger restraint than timid delicacy to such a nature as that of Agnes, and therefore she did not throw herself on the bosom of Colonel Hubert, and thus obliterate by one moment of unrestrained feeling all the doubts and fears that had so long tormented them both. She only opened her beautiful eyes upon him, which seemed to say, " Is then the dark cloud past that has divided us? Hubert, may I be happy again?" The unhappy Hubert, however, dared not answer this appeal, though he read it, and felt it at the very bottom of his heart ; and what under happier circumstances would have tempted him to kneel beside her for ever, now made him spring to his feet as if terrified at the danger that he ran. " Agnes," he said, " you must no longer be left ignorant of my misery. You may, you must have seen something of it, but not all. You have not seen, you have not guessed what, the struggle has been between a passion as fervent as ever warmed the heart of man and a sense of honour too late awakened, perhaps, which has made it a duty to suspend all pleadings for an avowed return, till " Till," repeated Agnes, agitated but full of hope, that the moment was indeed come when the dark and mysterious cloud which had dimmed all her prospects should be dispelled. " Hear my confession, Agnes, and pity me at least, if you find it impossible to excuse me. Do you remember the first time I ever saw you? It was at a shop at Clifton." Agnes bowed. " Do you remember the friend who was with me? " Agnes bowed again, and this time she coloured too. Colonel Hubert sighed profoundly, but presently went on with the confession he had braced his nerves to make. " That friend, Agnes, the generous, noble hearted Frederick Stephenson, saw, even in that brief interview, the beauty, the grace, the delicacy which it took me days to develop. In short, he loved you, Agnes, before, almost before I had ever looked at you. I was his dearest friend. He hid no thought from me, and with all the frankness of his delightful character he confessed his honourable attachment. And how was it, think you, that I answered him?" Agnes raised her eyes to his face with a very anxious look, but spoke not a word, and Colonel Hubert, with a heightened colour that mounted to his temples, went on. " I told him, Miss Willoughby, that a young lady chaperoned by a person with the manners and appearance of your aunt Barnaby was not a fitting wife for him." The eyes of Agnes fell, and her cheeks too were now dyed with crimson. Colonel Hubert saw it and felt it all, but he went on. " The subject was repeatedly revived between us, and as his attachment increased, so did also my opposition to it. I placed before him, in the strongest manner I was capable of doing, all the objections to the connection as they then appeared to me, and I did it, as I thought, purely from a sense of duty to himself and his family, which had recently become so closely connected with my own. But, alas! Agnes, my peace has been and is destroyed by the dreadful doubt whether some selfish feelings, unknown to myself, might not at length have mingled with these strong remonstrances. Knowing as I do the character of Sir Edward and his two sisters, no remorse was awakened in my mind so long as he remained with Mrs. Barnaby ; and the last time I conversed with my poor friend, I used language so strong upon the subject, that he left me in great anger. But it appears that, notwithstanding his just resentment, these remonstrances had weight, for he immediately left the kingdom, and has, I believe, remained in Paris ever since. Think then, Miss Willoughby, judge for me if you can, with what feelings I contemplate the unlooked for change in your position. Oh, Agnes, would that your excellent Miss Compton had preserved her coldness to you till you had been my wife! Even then I might have felt a pang for Stephenson, but the knowledge that his friends would not, like mine, have forgotten Mrs. Barnaby in their admiration for her niece, would have furnished a justification of the events which followed his departure too reasonable to be set aside. But what must I feel now, when I think of the banished Frederick? Banished by me, that I might take his place. Excepting to Mary Peters, who had been aware of the attachment of Frederick Stephenson long before herself, Agnes had never breathed a hint to any human being of the proposal she had received from him, and it had not most assuredly been her intention ever to have named it to Colonel Hubert. She had, indeed, but rarely remembered it herself, and hoped and believed that before they met again the gay young man would quite have forgotten it. But now she could preserve his secret no longer, and eager to speak what she thought would entirely relieve his self-reproaches to hear, she said, with glowing cheeks and an averted eye, " Let me then confess to you, Colonel Hubert." These unlucky words, however, intended as a preface to the only intelligence that could effectively have soothed this agitation, unfortunately increased it tenfold, and raising his hand to arrest what she was about to say, he replied with an impetuosity with which she could not at that moment contend. " Confess nothing, Miss Willoughby, to me. I see that I have awakened feelings which I ought to have foreseen would inevitably be called into existence by such a disclosure. Suffer me to say a few words more, and I have done. A week ago, I did what I ought to have done as soon as your present position was known to me. I wrote to Mr. Stephenson, and told him that every obstacle was removed, and that "" You wrote to him, Colonel Hubert? " exclaimed Agnes, greatly disturbed. " Oh ! why did you not tell me all this before? "" It is not yet too late, Miss Willoughby," he replied bitterly. " Another letter shall follow my first, more explicit, more strongly urging his return." " But you will not hear me, Colonel Hubert," said Agnes, bursting into tears. " Have patience for a moment, and you will understand it all." At this moment a carriage stopped at the door, and the knocker and the bell together gave notice of Miss Compton's return. " It is my aunt," cried Agnes. " Indeed she must not see me thus, or how could I explain to her what must appear so strange as her finding me in tears, and you beside me? Let me see you again, Colonel Hubert. I pray you to let me see you again, when I may be able to speak to you, but now I must go." And so saying, she escaped from the room just in time to avoid meeting Miss Compton at the door. From a very early period of their short acquaintance, Miss Compton had made up her mind to consider Colonel Hubert as a very superior personage, but of a remarkably grave and silent character ; so much so, indeed, that while she admired and approved her Agnes the more for loving and being loved by so dignified an individual, she could not help wondering a little occasionally that so it should be. But this feeling she carefully concealed, and made it a point, whenever a shade of gravity more profound than usual was perceptible on his features, a circumstance not unfrequent, to avoid interfering with his reserve by any loquacious civility. This line of conduct had often been a great relief to him, but never more so than on the present occasion, when if any lengthened greetings had occurred to stop his retreat, it would have been impossible for him to have preserved the outward semblance of cold composure in which he had hitherto found shelter from observation. " You are going, Colonel Hubert," she said. " Well, I will not detain you, for I am going to be busy myself. Good morning." And so he escaped. On reaching home, he found a letter waiting for him, which by no means tended to calm his spirits. It was from Frederick Stephenson, and ran thus: " My dear Hubert, " Your letter puzzles me ; but not many hours after this reaches you, I hope we shall mutually understand each other better than we do at present. I am on my road to England, and as all explanation must be impossible till we meet, I will only add, that I am yours ever, Frederick Stephenson." A few hours then, and all doubt, all uncertainty would be over. A full explanation must take place, and rather than endure a continuance of what he had lately suffered, Colonel Hubert felt inclined to welcome the result, be it what it might. CHAPTER XVI. Volume 3, Chapter XVI of The Widow Barnaby by Frances Milton Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. CHAPTER XVI. A discovery scene, productive of many new relations, and various other consequences. The day next but one after this letter reached him, Miss Compton and Agnes were engaged to dine with Lady Elizabeth. Colonel Hubert had not ventured to present himself in the Mall during the interval, for though, on cooler meditation, he did not believe that the unfortunate words, "Let me, then, confess to you, Colonel Hubert," were meant to usher a confession of love to his rival, he doubted not that they would have been followed by an avowal of her agreeing with himself in deeming his own conduct most reprehensible; and just then he felt he could not receive this, notwithstanding its justice, in such a manner as to assist in obtaining pardon for the fault. To Sir Edward he had mentioned the probability of his brother's early return, but without hinting at the chance of their seeing him at Clifton on his arrival in England. The ladies of the party, namely Lady Elizabeth, Lady Stephenson, Miss Compton, and Agnes, were assembled in the drawing room, the two gentlemen not having yet quitted the dining parlour, when a knock at the door announced company. " Who can that be? " said Lady Stephenson. " Have you invited evening company? "" Not a soul, my dear," replied her aunt. " I mean to have a treat again. I think I am growing sick of curiosities." " Tant mieux, dear aunt," replied Lady Stephenson. " But invited or not, you have visitors coming now, I hear them on the stairs." Lady Stephenson was right. The old butler opened the drawing room door almost as she spoke, and announced, " Mr. Stephenson." " Frederick !" exclaimed his fair sister in law, looking as if she meant to receive him very kindly. " Young Stephenson ?" said Lady Elizabeth. " I did not know that he was coming to Clifton." " Sir Edward's brother, I suppose," said Miss Compton. But Agnes said nothing, though had any one laid a hand upon her heart, they would have discovered that his arrival was not a matter of indifference. To receive him with the appearance of it was, however, absolutely necessary, and she very resolutely assumed an aspect of tranquillity. It was not necessary that she should look towards the door to greet him as he entered, and therefore she did not do it ; but, notwithstanding the attention she devoted to the pattern of the hearth rug, she became aware, within a moment after this electrifying name had been announced, that not one only, but three people were in the room, and that one of them was a lady. Agnes then looked up, and the first figure which distinctly met her eye was not that of Frederick Stephenson, but of a gentleman bearing the stamp of some 40 years, perhaps, upon his handsome but delicate features. He was not tall, but slightly and elegantly formed, which was perceptible though wrapped in a travelling frock trimmed with fur, and his whole appearance was decidedly that of a gentleman. But who these might be who were with him, or how they were received by Lady Elizabeth, the eye of Agnes had no power to inquire, for it was fascinated, as it were, by the earnest gaze of this stranger, who, having already stepped forward a pace or two nearer to her than the rest, stood looking at her with very evident emotion. The first words she heard spoken were in the voice of young Stephenson, which she immediately recognised, though the purport of them was unintelligible. " Yes, my dear sir, you are quite right," he said, " that is our Agnes." But though these words were somewhat startling, they drew her attention less than the expression of the large blue eyes that were fixed upon her. There was admiration, tenderness, and a strange sort of embarrassment, all legibly mingled in that earnest look ; but why was it fixed on her? What effect this mute scene produced on the other persons present Agnes could not know, for she did not withdraw her eyes from those of the mysterious stranger, till at length he turned from her, and stepping back, took the hand of a very young but very beautiful girl, whom he led towards the sofa she occupied, and placing her on it, said, " Agnes Willoughby, receive your sister, and let her plead for her father and yours. You have been long, long neglected, my poor child, but there has been some excuse for it. Can you forgive me, Agnes ?"" Good God ! My father !" she exclaimed, starting up and stretching out her hands towards him. " Is it possible, sir, that you are indeed my father ?"" You speak as if you wished it were so, Agnes," he replied, taking her in his arms, and impressing a kiss upon her forehead ;" and I will echo your words. Is it possible?" "Possible! Oh yes, sir, it is possible. I have so longed to know that I had a father. And is this sweet creature my sister?" she continued, turning her tearful eyes upon the beautiful girl, who upon this appeal sprang forward, and enclosing both her father and Agnes in her arms, replied to it by saying, " Yes, dearest Agnes, I am your sister, indeed I am, and I know you very well, and all about you, though you know so little about me. But you will not refuse to own me, will you?" For all reply Agnes bent forward and kissed her fondly. Miss Compton, who, as may be supposed, had watched this discovery scene with no little interest, now stepped towards them, while young Stephenson was engaged in explaining it to Lady Elizabeth and his sister in law ; and looking from one sister to the other, and from them both to their father, she said, " You will perhaps hardly remember that we ever met, Mr. Willoughby, but my name is Compton, and I recall your features perfectly. You once passed an hour at my brother's house when I was there, and that these girls are sisters, no one that sees them together will be likely to deny. God bless them both, pretty creatures ! I hope they will each be a blessing to the other. But, to be sure, it seems to be a most romantic story, and wonderfully like those I used to read in my bower, Agnes." " There is a good deal that is very sad in my part of it, Miss Compton," replied Mr. Willoughby ;" but at this moment I can hardly regret it, as herein I hope to show some excuse for my long negligence respecting my poor girl. Take this on trust, my good lady, will you," he added, holding out his hand to her, " that no displeasure towards me may destroy the happiness of this meeting." Miss Compton gave him her hand very frankly, saying, " I have no right to be very severe upon you, Mr. Willoughby, for, without any misfortunes at all to plead as an excuse for it, our dear Agnes might tell you some naughty stories about me. But she does not look as if she were much inclined to complain of anybody. What a pair of happy, lovely looking creatures ! And how very strong the likeness to each other, and of both to you !" Willoughby retired a step or two, and leaning against the chimney piece, seemed disposed to enjoy the contemplation of the picture she pointed out, in silence. Lady Elizabeth claimed the attention of Miss Compton, that she might express her interest, satisfaction, surprise, and so forth. Lady Stephenson slipped out of the room to communicate the news to her husband and brother, and prepare them for the company they had to receive ; and then Frederick Stephenson approached the sisters, and drawing a chair towards them, very freely took a hand of each. That of Agnes trembled. She felt that the happiness of her life would be for ever destroyed, if this young man was come back in consequence of Colonel Hubert's letter, with the persuasion that it was her purpose to accept him ; and favourable as was the moment for a sort of universal philanthropy and unrestrained epanchement de coeur, she could not resist the impulse which led her to withdraw her hand, and return his affectionate smile with a look of coldness and reserve. Perfectly undaunted, however, the gay Frederick continued to look at her with an air of the most happy confidence ; but suddenly, as it seemed, recollecting that it was possible, though they had all of them been at least 10 minutes in the room together, no explanation might have yet reached her, he said in a manner to show that he was too happy to be very grave, though quite sufficiently in earnest to deserve belief, " If you accept my Nora for a sister, Agnes, you must accept me for a brother too. She knows that till I saw her I thought you the most charming person in the world, and as she forgives me for this, I hope you will show as much resemblance to her in mind as in person, and forgive me for thinking, when I did see her, that she was still more charming than you." And then it was that Agnes, for the first time in her life, felt wholly, perfectly, and altogether happy. She saw in an instant, with the rapid glance of love, that all the misty cloud that had hung between her and Hubert was withdrawn for ever ; and then she felt how very delightful it was to have a father, and such an elegant, interesting looking father ; and then she became fully aware what a blessing it was to have a sister, and that sister so beautiful, and so capable of inspiring love in every heart — save one, guarded as Hubert's was guarded. Her joy, her new born gladness of spirit danced in her eyes, as she now freely returned the young man's laughing glance, and restoring to him the hand she had withdrawn, she exclaimed, " Oh, Frederick ! Why did you not answer Hubert's letter and tell him this ?"" It is so, then ? It is as I hoped, my sweet Agnes ; and you will be doubly our sister. Why did I not answer Hubert's letter ? Because it was the most mystical, unintelligible, dark, and diplomatic performance that ever was put forth. Did you see it, Agnes ?"" No, I did not," she replied with a smile ;" but I can imagine that it might have been a little in that style ; yet still you should have answered it." " I did answer it ; that is, I replied to it by a line or two written in a prodigious hurry. But you must perceive that I could not enclose Nora in a cover ; and as she is, to all intents and purposes, my answer, I was obliged to let him wait till I could convey her properly, and place her before his eyes and his understanding." " And so convince him," replied Agnes, with another smile, full of her new born gaiety, " that the moment she is seen all other ladies must be forgotten. Prove that to Colonel Hubert, Mr. Stephenson, and I will prove to you "" What, you tremendous looking sibyl, what? "" A very fatal sister," she replied ; and then the door opened, and Lady Stephenson preceded the two gentlemen she had brought from the dining parlour into the room. Agnes, no longer the fearful, shrinking Agnes, sprang forward to meet them, and taking Colonel Hubert by the hand, led him to her father, saying in an altered accent, that at once entered his heart, and told him that all was right. " Let me present you to my father, Hubert, to my dear father, Colonel Hubert. He will indeed be doubly dear to us, for he has brought with him a sister for both of us, whom I feel sure we shall for ever love." But hardly did Agnes, who seemed newly awakened from some heavy spell that had benumbed her heart, hardly did she give time for a courteous greeting between the gentlemen, ere she passed her arm beneath that of Colonel Hubert, and led him to the sofa. Frederick started forward to meet him, and laying a hand on each shoulder, said in his ear, yet not so low but that Agnes could hear him too, " It was lucky I did not take you to France with me, Hubert, or I should certainly never have got a wife at all. As it is, however, permit me," he added aloud, " to present you, Colonel Hubert, to Miss Nora Willoughby. Nora, dearest, this gentleman is the best friend I have in the world. My brother's wife is his sister, and your sister, my fair bride elect, will very soon be his wife, or I cannot read the stars. So, as you may perceive, our catastrophe is exceedingly like that great model of all catastrophes, in which the happy hero says, ' And these are all my near relations. Ecce signum, here is my own elder brother. Sir Edward Stephenson, Miss Nora Willoughby. Is she not charming, Edward? I hope I have pleased you at last, and their ladyships, my sisters too, for I assure you everything is very elegant, well born, and so forth. But you are not to sit down by her, though, for all that, unless you make room for me between you, for she has already given away more smiles than I can at all afford to spare ; and besides, I have 100 things to say to her. I want to ask her how she likes you all." Colonel Hubert, as soon as his gay friend had reseated himself, gave one speaking look to Agnes, and then devoted himself entirely to Mr. Willoughby. By degrees the party began to talk together with less of agitation and more of comfort ; but Frederick was not permitted wholly to engross his young fiancee, for all the ladies crowded round her, and vied with each other in giving a cordial welcome to this young foreigner in the land of her fathers. She was in truth a very sweet young creature, and soon converted the kindness which circumstances called for into very cordially liking. Distant hopes were talked of without reserve, and immediate arrangements canvassed. Miss Compton kindly invited the young stranger to share her sister's apartment, a servant was despatched to secure rooms for Mr. Willoughby and Frederick at the hotel, and the happiness their unexpected arrival had brought to two harassed hearts of the party seemed to diffuse itself very delightfully among them all. At length Miss Compton's carriage was announced, and while the cloaks of the fair sisters were wrapped round them by their vowed servants, Mr. Willoughby performed the same office for her, and took that opportunity of asking leave to wait upon her on the following morning, in order to relate to her such passages of the history of his long exile as might, in some degree, account for his having left her adopted child for so many years without a father. While this appointment was making with the aunt, the niece contrived, unheard by all, to whisper a word or two which led to an appointment for her also. Colonel Hubert had more than once that evening taught her to understand, by the eloquence of looks, the delightful change that had been wrought within him ; but it was Agnes who first found the opportunity of giving expression to it in words. He stood behind her as he arranged her cloak, and when this was done, she turned suddenly round to him, and said, in an accent of playful reproach, " Hubert, may I be happy now ?" His answer was, " Will you see me to morrow, and alone ?" She blushed ; perhaps at remembering how often she had before wished to converse with him in the manner he now for the first time proposed, but she nodded her assent. He handed her to the carriage, pressed her hand, and whispered " 11 o'clock," as he put her into it, and then mounted to his chamber without exchanging a word more with any living soul, that he might enjoy, for the first time since he had yielded up his heart, the luxury of meditating on Agnes and her promised love, without any mixture of self-reproach to poison the enjoyment. CHAPTER XVII. Volume 3, Chapter XVII of The Widow Barnaby by Frances Milton Trollope, This recording is in the public domain. CHAPTER XVII. Great Contentment. Had not Nora Willoughby been an interesting and amiable creature, her introduction at this moment to all the freedom of a sister's rights would certainly have been less agreeable than surprising to Agnes ; and perhaps, notwithstanding the sweet expression of her lovely face, the pretty tenderness of her manner, and the lively interest which one so near in blood could not fail to awaken, Agnes, as she entered her bedroom on that eventful night, would rather have entered it alone. Her heart seemed too full to permit her conversing freely with any one ; and it was by an effort, not made altogether without pain, that she turned her thoughts from Hubert and all that vast world of happiness which appeared opening before them, to welcome her fair sister to her bower, and to begin such a conversation with her as sisters so placed might be expected to hold. But she was soon rewarded for the exertion, for it was quite impossible to pass an hour of intimate intercourse with Nora without loving her, for she was made up of frankness, warm affection, light heartedness, and sweet temper. As soon as Peggy had performed all the services required of her, and that the door was fairly closed behind her, Nora threw her arms round the neck of Agnes, and pressed her in a long and fond embrace. " Dear, dear Agnes !" she exclaimed, " I wish you could share the pleasure that I enjoy at this moment ; but it is impossible. I came upon you so suddenly, unexpectedly, unintelligibly, and must rather startle and astound than give you the delight that you give me. For I have been preparing to love you for many weeks past, and I have been longing till I was almost sick to get to you. And after such eager and sanguine expectations as mine, it is so delightful to find oneself not disappointed." " And is such the case with my sweet sister? " replied Agnes caressingly. " Indeed, indeed it is. Frederick told me you were very beautiful, but I did not expect to find you half so — so elegant, so finished, so every way superior. I shall quarrel with you, Nora, if you say such very fine things to me. Perhaps I think you very pretty too, dear ; but if I do, I must not say so, because they tell us that we are so much alike, it would be like admiring myself." " Well ! And you cannot help admiring yourself, it is impossible. But, sister Agnes, what a blessing it was that you did not happen to fall in love with Frederick ! What would have become of me if you had ? For, do you know, I loved almost as soon as I saw him. It was all so odd. It was at the Italian opera that we first met, and I could not help observing that the handsomest man I had ever seen was looking at me almost incessantly. Papa never saw a bit about it, for when he is listening to music he never cares for anything. However, I do assure you, I tried to behave properly, though, if I had done quite the contrary, papa would never have found it out. I never looked at him at all above 3 or 4 times, and that was accidentally from happening to turn round my head. But whether I thought about it or not, there were his beautiful large eyes always sure to be fixed upon me ; and when the opera was over, he must have run out of his box the moment we left ours, for I saw him as we got into the fiacre standing close beside it. Well, I hardly know how it happened, but from that time I never stirred out without meeting him. He never spoke, of course, but that did not prevent our knowing one another just as well as if we had been the oldest acquaintance. At last, however, he managed very cleverly to find out that papa was acquainted with Monsieur Dupont, who gives such beautiful concerts, and receives all the English so hospitably, and he asked as a great favour to be invited to meet us. And so he was, and then we were introduced, and then everything went on beautifully, for he knew you and the name of Willoughby, and the likeness and all that, convinced him that we must be the same family. So he and papa very soon made it all out, and then he came to call upon us every day. And very, very soon afterwards I was engaged to be his wife, as soon as possible, after we all got back to England." " Thank you, dearest Nora !" replied Agnes, who, notwithstanding all her preoccupation, had found no difficulty in listening very attentively to this narrative. " I cannot tell you all the pleasure your little history has given me. There is nobody in the world I should like so well for a brother as Frederick Stephenson, and there is nobody in the world I should like so well for a sister as Frederick Stephenson's wife." " That is delightful !" cried Nora, joyfully ;" and we certainly are two of the luckiest girls in the world to have everything just as we would wish. But, Agnes, there is one thing I shall never understand. How could you help falling in love with Frederick when he fell in love with you? "" Because I happened just then," replied Agnes, laughing, " to be falling in love with some one else." " Well, certainly that was the most fortunate thing in the world, and Frederick himself thinks so now. He told me that he had a great mind to shoot himself when you refused him, but that the very first moment he saw me, he felt certain that I should suit him a great deal better than you would have done." " That I am sure is quite true, Nora," replied Agnes, very earnestly, " for I too feel certain that I never could have suited anybody but Colonel Hubert. And now, my sweet sister, let us go to sleep, or we shall hardly be up early enough to meet the friends who, I think, will be wishing to see us again. Good night, dearest." " Good night, darling Agnes. Is not it pleasant to have a sister, Agnes ? It is so nice to be able to tell you everything. I am sure I could never be able to do it to anybody else. Good night." " Bless you, sweet Nora !" replied Agnes ; and then, each nestling upon her pillow, and giving some few happy dreamy thoughts to the object they loved best, they closed their fair young eyes and slept till morning. The waking was to both of them, perhaps, somewhat like the continuance of a dream ; but Peggy came in and threw the light of day upon them, while each fair girl seemed to look at her own picture as she contemplated her pretty bed fellow, and appeared to be exceedingly well pleased by the survey. It was already late, and Agnes, rapidly as she was learning to love her companion, did not linger at her toilet, but leaving Nora, with a hasty kiss, to the care of Peggy, she hastened to the breakfast table, and made aunt Betsy's heart glad, by telling her at last that she expected Colonel Hubert would call about 11 o'clock, and that if she did not think it wrong, she should like to speak to him for a few minutes alone. " Wrong, my child !" exclaimed Miss Compton. " Why, I never in my life read a work painting the manners of the age, in which I did not find interviews, sometimes occurring 3 or 4 times in a day, entirely tete a tete between the parties." " Then I may go into the back drawing room presently, may I, aunt Betsy? And perhaps you would tell William "" Yes, yes, my dear, I'll tell him everything. But eat some breakfast, Agnes, or I am sure you will not be able to talk. I suppose it is about your new sister, and your father, and all that you want to speak to him." " There are many things, aunt Betsy. But, good heavens ! there is a knock. Will it not look very odd for you to send him in to me?" Without waiting to give an answer, the agile old lady intercepted William's approach to the door, in time to give the order she wished ; and in 2 minutes Colonel Hubert was ushered into a room where the happy but blushing Agnes was alone. His first few steps towards her were made at the pace at which drawing room floors are usually traversed, but the last part of the distance was cleared by a movement considerably more rapid, for she had risen in nervous agitation as he approached, and for the first time that he had ever ventured a caress, he threw his arms round her, and pressed her to his heart. Agnes struggled not to disengage herself, but wept without restraint upon his bosom. " You do then love me, Agnes ? At last our hearts have met, and never can be severed more. But still you must tell me very often that you have forgiven me, dearest, for is it not difficult to believe ? And does it not require frequent vouching ?"" What is it, Montague, that you would have forgiven ?" said Agnes, looking up at him, smiling through her tears. This was the first time that her lips had pronounced his Christian name to any ears but her own, and she blushed as she uttered it. " Agnes, my own Agnes !" he exclaimed, " you have forgiven me, or you would not call me Montague. How is it possible," he continued, looking fondly at her, " that a word so hackneyed and familiar from infancy as our own name, can be made to thrill through the whole frame like a touch of electricity?" He drew her to the sofa from which she had risen, and placing himself by her, said, " Now then, Agnes, let us sit down soberly together, and take an unvarnished retrospect of all that has passed since we first met. Yet why should I ask for this ? I hate to think of it ; for it is a fact, Agnes, which his subsequent attachment to your sister must not make you doubt, Frederick and his 7,000 a year would have been at your disposal, had not my dissuasions prevented it ; and had this been so, who knows?" A shade of melancholy seemed once again settling on the noble countenance of Colonel Hubert. Agnes could not bear it, and looking earnestly at him, she said, " Montague, answer me sincerely this one question, which is the strongest feeling in your mind at this moment : the pleasure derived from believing that your influence on Frederick was so great, or the pain of doubting how the offer you speak of would have been received?" " I have no pleasure in believing I have influence on any one, save yourself," he answered gravely. " I am glad of that, Montague," she said, " because you somewhat overrated your influence with my brother elect. Save for your foolish doubts, infidel ! You never should have known it, but Frederick Stephenson did propose to me, Hubert, before he went abroad." " And you refused him, Agnes ?"" And I refused him, Hubert." " Oh ! had I known this earlier, what misery should I have been spared !" cried Colonel Hubert. " You know not, you could not know all I have suffered, Agnes. Yet surely, dearest, when last we spoke together, it was but yesterday, in this very room, you must then have guessed the cause of the dreadful restraint that kept us asunder." " There was no need of guessing then," replied Agnes, smiling, " for you told me so distinctly." " Then why not on the instant remove the load from my heart ? Were you quite incapable of feeling how galling it must have been to me ?"" I'll tell you how that came to pass," said Agnes, rising. " Do you sit still there, as I did yesterday, and say, ' Let me then confess to you, Colonel Hubert,' and then I will answer thus," and raising her hand, as if to stop his speech, she added, mimicking his impatient tone, " Confess nothing, Miss Willoughby, to me ;' and then you told me you had written to him, and when I exclaimed with some degree of dismay at the idea of your having written to recall him, you again interrupted me by saying that you would do it again, and then my aunt came, and so we parted. Then whose fault was it that I did not tell you ?"" My own, Agnes, it was my own ; and, alas ! I did not suffer for it alone. How wretched you must have been made by my vehemence ! But you have forgiven me, and all this must be forgotten for ever. There is, however, one subject on which I would willingly ask a few more questions. These, I hope, you will answer, Agnes." " Yes," she replied, gaily, " you may hope for an answer to all your questions, provided that just when I am about to speak, you do not raise your arm thus, in order to prevent me." " I will do my utmost to avoid it," he replied, " and for the greater security will place the offending arm thus," throwing it round her. " And now tell me, Agnes, why it was that you would not accept Frederick Stephenson ?"" And will you be pleased to tell me, Colonel Hubert, why it was that you did not propose to anybody else but me ?"" Because I loved you, and you only." " Because I loved you, and you only," repeated Agnes. " Is that an echo ?" said Colonel Hubert. " No," replied Agnes, " it is only the answer to your question." " Then, exactly when I was occupied in finding reasons incontrovertible why the niece of Mrs. Barnaby should never be loved by mortal man, the lovely Agnes Willoughby, was loving me ?"" Even so," said Agnes, somewhat mournfully. " False impressions have worked us so much woe, that it would not be wise to let a little feminine punctilio prevent you seeing things as they are. Yet it is hardly fair, Hubert, to make me tell you this." " Oh, say not so !" he replied. " Mistake not the source of this questioning, for, Agnes, be secure, that Hubert, for the wealth of all the world, would not offend thee. But can you wonder that, after all I have suffered, my heart and soul thirsts for an assurance of your love ? What might well suffice another, Agnes, ought not to suffice me. I am so much older." " I cannot help it, Montague ; nor could I help it when you took me out of the clutches of Major Allen upon the Windmill Hill, nor when you were pleased to be so gracious as to approve my singing, nor upon a great many other occasions, when it would have been wise for me to remember it, perhaps. But if I love you and you love me, I cannot see how your age, or mine either, need interfere to prevent it." Perhaps at last Colonel Hubert arrived at the same satisfactory conclusion, for the conversation was a long one ; and before it was ended, some little sketchings of his feelings during the early part of their acquaintance brought to Agnes's mind the soothing belief, that after the evening of the Clifton ball her image had not forsaken his fancy more, though it was by slow degrees that it had grown into what he called such terrible strength there as to conquer every other feeling. Agnes listened to him as he stated this with most humble minded and unfeigned astonishment, but also with most willing belief, and then following his example, he quoted Shakespeare, exclaiming, " And if an angel should have come to me and told me thus, I would have believed no tongue but Hubert's." CHAPTER XVIII. Volume 3, Chapter XVIII of The Widow Barnaby by Frances Milton Trollope. This LibriVox is in the public domain. CHAPTER XVIII. A Retrospect and Conclusion. Mr. Willoughby was less punctual to his appointment than Colonel Hubert, and as the young Nora, weary with her journey, and exhausted from the excitement of the scenes which followed it, had not yet left her bed, he, too, had the advantage of a tete a tete. It is needless to enter upon any minute repetition of a narrative which had, in fact, little or no connection with the personages of our drama. It was evident that Mr. Willoughby had suffered much, both from the early loss of his fair young wife, and the continued hostility, or more properly speaking, the continued neglect of his family. He had exchanged into a regiment sent on a dangerous and disagreeable service, and with broken spirits and failing health, might very likely have perished before it was ended, had not his good gifts very suddenly made captive the affections of a young girl almost as pretty as poor Sophia Compton, and quite as rich as she was the contrary. This marriage converted him into the only son and heir of a wealthy merchant. All his new family required of him, in exchange for their daughter and their wealth, was that he should live amongst them. This he consented to do, but his life was not a happy one. With the prospect of great possessions before him, he was kept in almost penniless dependence upon his father-in-law; all his wants, indeed, profusely supplied, but with no more power to assist in the maintenance of the child he had left in England, than if he had been a slave chained to the oar. For 16 years he had led this painful life of penniless splendour, in the course of which he was again left a widower with one little girl; but though his existence in his father-in-law's family had lost its only charm by this event, he was prevented from making any effort to change it, as much by his total inability to support himself elsewhere, as by a consideration for the interest of his child. As she grew up, he began once more to feel that life was not altogether a bore and a burden, and at length his passive submission to years of wearying annoyance was rewarded by finding himself, at the death of the generous but tyrannical Mr. Grafton, the possessor of a handsome life income, and the sole guardian of the young heiress his daughter. It was then that, for the first time, he felt disposed to recall himself to the memory of those he had left behind in England; and the desire to do so became so strong, that he lost no time in finally arranging his affairs in the country of his exile, and taking his departure for Europe. For the sake of having a friend as commander of the ship in which he sailed, he took his passage for Havre, and, once landed on the coast of France, he yielded to Nora's entreaties that they should pass a few weeks at Paris before they left it. His accidental meeting with Mr. Stephenson there was then related, and its consequences as it respected his daughter, and their journey home together, concluded his narration. "Your romance, Mr. Willoughby," replied Miss Compton, "appears likely to come to a very happy conclusion; but I confess I wonder that never during your 16 years of what appears to have been very perfect leisure, you could never have found time to make any single inquiry about your little Agnes." "And I wonder at it too, Miss Compton. But it is more easy to recall the feelings that led to this than to explain them. I believe that the total impossibility of my transmitting any share of the wealth amidst which I lived to a child whom I had great reason to fear might want it, was the primary cause of it; and then came the hope that at no very distant day my inquiries for her might be made in a manner less torturing to my feelings than by acknowledging myself to be alive, in circumstances of high-fed pauperism, without the power of relieving any wants, however pressing, with which my inquiries might happen to make me acquainted. Had I known that you, Miss Compton, had adopted my little girl, I should not so long have suffered her to believe me dead, because I had not the power of making my being alive a source of joy to her." Whether Miss Compton thought this apology a good one, or the reverse, does not appear; for all the branches of the party who so unexpectedly met together at the house of Lady Elizabeth Norris, continued from that time forward to live on terms of the most agreeable amity together; and perhaps the only symptom by which some little feeling of disapprobation might have been perceived, was Miss Compton's begging to decline, on the part of all interested, Mr. Willoughby's proposal of insuring his life for £10,000 as a portion for his eldest daughter. "I do assure you, sir, there is no occasion for it," said the little spinster, with great good humour, but also with a very evident intention of having her own way. "I believe that if you will mention this subject to Colonel Hubert, or to Lady Elizabeth Norris, his aunt, you will find that they both agree with me in thinking such a sacrifice of income on your part quite unnecessary, and decidedly unwise. Your sisters have not behaved to you kindly, but they have connected themselves well, and I believe we all think it would be more advantageous to both your daughters that their favours should be propitiated by your appearing before them in a style which may show you have no need of their assistance, than by anything else you can do for them. The young ladies are both about to marry well, and with fortunes very fairly proportioned to those of their respective husbands, and any family coolness with such near relations as Lady Eastcombe and the Honourable Mrs. Nivet would be both disadvantageous and disagreeable." " My noble sisters will be vastly well disposed to welcome me now, Miss Compton, I have little doubt," replied Mr. Willoughby, with as much asperity as he was capable of feeling for any offence committed against him ;" and I confess to you that the reconciliation would be particularly agreeable to me, from the power your generous adoption of my poor girl gives me now of proving to them that my marriage with Sophia Compton was not such a connection as to merit the severity with which they have treated it." " I have no sort of objection to your proving this to them in any manner that you please," replied Miss Compton ;" and I rather think the most effectual mode of doing so will be, by permitting the portion of Agnes to be furnished by Sophia Compton's aunt." " 5,000 then let it be, Miss Compton, 5,000 settled upon younger children," said Mr. Willoughby. " No, sir," persisted the old lady, " it must not be, if you please. The property of Compton Basett, with the name, and a sum of money withal sufficient considerably to add and to improve the estate, will be settled by me on the second son of your daughter Agnes. Lady Elizabeth, on the part of her nephew, adds £10,000 to the settlement on younger children, which, together with my property, will of course belong to Agnes for her life. I hope, sir, this statement will satisfy you respecting the provision to be made for Miss Willoughby, and prevent your feeling any further anxiety on the subject." It was impossible Mr. Willoughby could declare himself dissatisfied, and from this time he ventured no further allusion to the scheme of insuring his life. Preparations for the two marriages now immediately began ; and the interval necessary to the completion of settlements and the building of carriages and dresses was, at the earnest request of Agnes, to be spent at Clifton. She loved the place, for it was identified in her memory with the first sight of Hubert, and she often declared that there was no spot on the earth's surface she should ever love so well as that little esplanade behind the windmill on which Colonel Hubert first offered her his arm, without deeming it necessary to utter a word of explanation for doing so. The vicinity of Mary Peters, too, was another reason, and no trifling one, for this partiality ; and as not one of the party had any point of reunion to plead for in preference, it was there that several weeks of present enjoyment and happy anticipation were passed. It was about midway between the time at which everything was settled between the lovers, their beloveds, and all parents, friends, and guardians interested therein, and the happy day on which the double espousals were celebrated, that Mr. and Mrs. Peters invited the whole party to dinner. No strangers were permitted to disturb the freedom of the society thus assembled at dinner, though, to gratify Lady Elizabeth's love of music, one or two proficients in that science were invited for the evening. The gentlemen, who probably thought the society in the drawing room more agreeable than that of good Mr. Peters, even though backed by his excellent wine, were already partaking coffee with the ladies, when a reduplicated knocking announced the arrival of visitors. " The Chamberlains, I suppose," said Mrs. Peters. " How very early they are !" But she was mistaken. It was not the Chamberlains ; for a footman threw wide the drawing room door, and announced " Mr. and Mrs. O'Donagough." " Mr. and Mrs. who ?" said Mrs. Peters to Mary. " Mr. and Mrs. what ?" said Elizabeth to Lucy. But before the parties thus questioned could have found time to answer, even had they possessed of the information required, a lady in sober coloured silk, with little rouge and no ringlets, followed by a handsome young man in black, entered the room, and considerably before many who had seen that lady before could recall the name by which they had known her, or reconcile her much changed appearance to their puzzled recollections, Mrs. Peters was enfolded in her arms. " My dear sister Peters," said Mrs. O'Donagough, " you are surrounded by so large a party, that I fear these last moments which I meant to dedicate to the affection of my kinsfolk, may be more inconvenient than pleasurable to you. But you cannot, I am sure, refuse me some portion of your society this evening, as it is probably the last one we shall ever pass together. Give me leave, sister Peters, to introduce you to my husband, the Reverend Mr. O'Donagough. Mr. Peters, Mr. O'Donagough. Mr. James Peters, Mr. O'Donagough. Mr. O'Donagough, my dear Mary. My husband, young ladies, Mr. O'Donagough, my dear Elizabeth and Lucy. Good heaven ! Agnes here And my aunt Compton, too? Well, so much the better, my dear Patrick. I shall now have the pleasure of presenting you to more relations, and as I should be proud to introduce you to all the world, this can only be an increase of pleasure to me. Agnes Willoughby, my dear, I can't say you behaved very well to me when the cheerful sort of life I indulged in, solely on your account, was changed for sorrow and imprisonment. But, nevertheless, my religious principles, which are stronger, my dear, than even when you knew me, lead me to forgive you, and better still, they lead me to introduce you to your excellent and exemplary uncle, the Reverend Mr. O'Donagough." During the whole course of these speeches, not a single voice had been heard to pronounce a syllable in reply, excepting that of Mr. Peters, who put his heels together, and made a bow when she paused, husband in hand, before him, and said, " Your servant, sir." But Agnes, when her turn came, though colouring most painfully at being so addressed, and with her heart sinking under the unexampled annoyance of this intrusion, contrived to say, " I hope I see you well, aunt? "" Yes, Miss Agnes, well and happy too, I promise you. And I wish you were likely to be as well settled, child, as I am, but I should like to know who it has come forward with money to dress you up so. You have not been singing on the stage, I hope. Your uncle would be dreadfully shocked at such a thing, for he says that stage plays are an abomination. And upon my word, aunt Compton, you are grown mighty smart too in your old age. Mercy on me, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." And then looking into the inner room, and perceiving that she had several more acquaintances there, she again took her husband by the hand, and led him into it, presenting him to Lady Elizabeth, her niece Colonel Hubert, and the two Stephensons. But when she came to Mr. Willoughby, who was standing with his youngest daughter at a window, she stopped, and, looking at him very earnestly, seemed puzzled. He bowed, though evidently without knowing her, and then, turning from her unpleasantly curious scrutiny, resumed his conversation with Nora. " I beg your pardon, sir," said Mrs. O'Donagough, " but I should really be very much obliged if you would tell me your name." " My name, madam, is Willoughby." " Gracious heaven !" exclaimed the bride. " O'Donagough ! Dearest, this is an eventful day indeed ! Behold your brother !" The two gentlemen stared at each other with an expression of countenance more indicative of surprise than of fraternal affection. Mr. Willoughby, indeed, looked very much as if he suspected that the poor lady, be she who she would, was decidedly not in her right mind ; while her husband, rather weary perhaps of such a continuity of introductions, escaped from her side, and stationed himself at another window. " Willoughby ! Dearest Willoughby ! Is it possible that you can have forgotten me ? Can you indeed have forgotten the sister of your wife ?"" Miss Martha ! Is it possible ? I beg your pardon, Mrs. Donagough. I certainly did not recollect you. I hope that I have the pleasure of seeing you well? My dearest Willoughby, you have no idea how exceedingly delighted I am to see you. What has become of you all this time ? I always supposed that you had been sold for a slave on the coast of Barbary, and I thank God and my excellent husband — where is he? I am sure the Reverend Mr. O'Donagough will thank God for your escape. And who is that pretty young lady? Dear me, she looks very much as if she was the daughter of your cruel master, and had fallen in love with you and set you at liberty. Poor Sophy ! One could not expect you should remember her for ever. Even I, you see, have forced myself to forget my poor dear Mr. Barnaby. But now I think of it, you can't know anything about Mr. Barnaby. Do, my dear Willoughby, sit down with me on this sofa, and let us have a talk." It was impossible for Mr. Willoughby to refuse, even had he wished it, which he really did not ; and the perfect security of being welcome, which Mrs. O'Donagough displayed in her manner of establishing herself, in some sort obliged Mrs. Peters to act as if she were so. The different groups which had been arranged by her entrance resumed their conversation. Coffee and tea included the intruders in its round, and everybody excepting Miss Compton seemed once more tolerably at their ease. She could not affect to recover her equanimity like the rest, but placing a low chair immediately behind the sofa on which Lady Elizabeth's tall figure was placed, she sat down so as to be completely concealed by her, saying, " Will your ladyship have the great kindness to let me hide myself here That horrible woman is, I confess it, my own brother's daughter, but she is, no matter what she is, I am much to blame, no doubt, but I hate to look upon her." " Put yourself quite at your ease, Miss Compton," replied Lady Elizabeth, laughing. " I have not the least difficulty in the world in comprehending your feelings. In you she has conquered the feeling of relationship ; in me, an instinct stronger still perhaps, namely, that of finding amusement in absurdity. But I almost think she has cured me of my menagerie caprice for ever. Yet it is difficult, too, not to enjoy the spectacle she offers with her young husband in her hand. But I don't mean to lose my music for her. Miss Peters, my dear, pray set your pianoforte going." This hint was immediately obeyed, and proved extremely conducive to the general ease. Good natured Mr. Peters entered into conversation with the reverend missionary, and soon learnt both his destination, and the interesting fact that he and his bride were to sail from the port of Bristol the day but one following. This he judiciously took an opportunity of speedily communicating to his lady, who took care that it should not long remain a secret to any individual present, excepting Mr. Willoughby, who continued in too close conversation with his sister in law to permit his being made a sharer in the general feeling of satisfaction which this information produced. Even Miss Compton, on hearing it, declared, that if the bride were really going to set off immediately for Botany Bay, there to remain for the term of her natural life, she thought she should be able to look at her for the rest of the evening with great philosophy. And in proof of her sincerity, she moved her place, and seated herself beside her friend Lady Elizabeth, more than half inclined to share in the amusement, which, notwithstanding her good resolutions, that facetious lady seemed inclined to take in contemplating the newly married pair. The conversation, meanwhile, between the two old acquaintances went on with considerable interest on both sides. Mr. Willoughby again related his adventures, and introduced his pretty daughter, and then, recurring once more to Silverton, Mrs. O'Donagough said, in an accent that betokened considerable interest in the question, " Willoughby, can you tell me anything about your old friend Tate? I have heard nothing of him of late years ; but of course you know that he married his cousin, Miss Temple, very soon after we left Silverton." " Very soon ?" said Mrs. O'Donagough, with a sigh. " Yes, my dear sister," replied Willoughby, with a melancholy smile, " it is not often that hearts lost in country quarters fail to return to the losers as they march out of the town. Happily both for the boys and girls concerned, but few such adventures end as mine did." " Happily, indeed, for me," replied the bride, with a toss of her head. " For aught I know, Tate may be alive now, and the happy wife of O'Donagough may well rejoice that no such thraldom was the consequence of Captain Tate's presumptuous attachment." Though Mr. Peters was really very civil, and though Mr. James joined for several minutes in the conversation, it is probable that the reverend missionary did not enjoy it so much as his lady did listening to Mr. Willoughby ; for at an early hour he told her it was time to take leave. She instantly obeyed, and began making her circular farewell, a ceremony of rather an embarrassing nature to many of the party, for out of the 15 persons she left in the room she kissed 8 — Lady Elizabeth, Sir Edward and Lady Stephenson, Colonel Hubert, and Frederick, being permitted to escape without even an attempt at joining them in this valedictory greeting, and Miss Compton, rising at her approach, making her by far the lowest courtesy her niece ever performed, in a manner which effectually averted it from herself. Mrs. O'Donagough's departure from England was a great blessing to all the connections she left behind, for, had she continued within reach of them, it is hardly possible but some annoyance would have been the consequence. As it was, however, sorrow seemed to depart with her, for seldom does so large a portion of happiness as fell to the lot of those she had formerly tormented, attend the career of any. Colonel Hubert, although he actually did very soon become a general, never again felt any alarm on the score of his age, but had the happiness of knowing that he was beloved with all the devoted tenderness that his heart desired, and his noble character deserved. Agnes never ceased to glory in her choice, and loved nothing better than to make aunt Betsy confess that her great nephew, notwithstanding his being a general, was more like a hero than any other man she had ever seen. Miss Compton lived to see an extremely fine lad, called Compton Hubert Compton, becoming so fond of the fields and pheasants of Compton Basset, as to leave her no rest till she had persuaded the trustees of the settlement she had made to expend the money in their hands upon the purchase of some neighbouring lands. including the manner in which they were situated, and the converting of the old roomy farm house into a residence which she confessed to be worthy of the representative of the ancient Compton race. This alteration, indeed, took place several years before the old lady died, and it was at Compton Basset, thus metamorphosed, that she had the pleasure of observing to Mrs. Wilmot that the conversation they had held on that spot together had not been altogether without effect. Mr. Willoughby and his elegant sisters become perfectly reconciled, a circumstance extremely agreeable to Lady Elizabeth Norris, as it gave her repeated opportunities of convincing herself that the nose of her niece, Mrs. General Hubert, was decidedly an improvement upon that of the Honourable Miss Nibbet, though the family resemblance was sufficiently remarkable. Frederick and Nora were as gay and happy a couple as ever enjoyed 10,000 a year together. Occasionally, of course, they were in debt, as all people of 10,000 a year must be ; but on the whole, they contrived to bring matters round wonderfully well, and as their property was fortunately settled, and Sir Edward happened to die without children, their family of 6 sons and 6 daughters were left at last very tolerably provided for. Mrs. O'Donagough's voyage to England was quite as agreeable as such a voyage generally is ; and on arriving she was greatly consoled for any little inequalities in her young husband's temper by the great success of his preaching. For at least 6 months after their arrival, he was more in the fashion than any gentleman of any profession had ever been before ; but at the end of that time the reverend preacher unfortunately was present at a horse race, upon which the recondite wisdom of the fable, which treats of a cat turned into a woman, must have become manifest to every reflecting mind acquainted with the circumstances of Mr. O'Donagough's early life, for no sooner did the race begin, than almost unconsciously he offered a bet to one of his congregation who stood near him, and before the end of the day he was seen mounted in a blue and yellow jacket, riding for a jockey who had broken his leg in a hurdle race. It was then that Mrs. O'Donagough became sensible of the blessing of having a settlement, and thankful was she to the noble father of her spouse for all the care bestowed to prevent his bringing himself again to penury, when he was brought home dead to her one fine afternoon, having lost his seat and his life together in a leap upon which he had betted considerably more than he possessed. She mourned for him as he deserved ; but not being upon this occasion very nice upon whom she could devolve the task of wearing black, she announced to all her Sydney friends that it was not the fashion in the old world for ladies of distinction to wear that dismal colour for more than a month for any husband who died by accident ; and it was, therefore, once more, in all the splendour of her favourite rainbow colouring, that she met a few months afterwards her old friend, Major Allen. He entered into no very tedious or particular details respecting the reasons for, or the manner of, his voyage out, but testified much cordial satisfaction at the meeting ; while, on the other hand, Mrs. O'Donagough was as remarkably communicative as he was the reverse, dilating largely on my Lord 's careful attention to her interest on her marriage with his son, who had insisted upon coming out in a fit of religious enthusiasm, which, as she sensibly observed, was not at all likely to last. It was not very long after this meeting that Mrs. O'Donagough became aware of the truth of the song which says, Mais on retourne toujours a ses premiers amours. For it was evident that the sentiment which circumstances had so rudely shaken at Clifton a year or two before, was again putting forth its leaves and flowers, and that it depended upon herself alone whether she should not yet become the wife of the accomplished Major Allen. For a few weeks she struggled with her remaining affection, but at the end of that time it overpowered all her doubts and fears, and only stipulating that, as before, all she had should be firmly settled upon herself, she once more entered the holy state of matrimony. In justice to the peerage, it ought to be stated, that on this her third wedding day she wore round her neck a very handsome necklace of shell, carefully sent out to her by the confidential agent of my Lord Mucklebury. End of Chapter 18 in Volume 3. End of The Widow Barnaby by Frances Milton Trollope. Recorded by Celine Major.